I believe the most compassionate aspect of our existence is the human mind as failure to connect everything it contains. We exist upon a calm island of unawareness within endless dark oceans of the unknown, and it was never intended for us to travel a great distance. The various fields of science, each pulling in its own way, have so far done us little damage. However, a time will come when combining separate pieces of knowledge will reveal such frightening views of true reality and of our dreadful place within it, that we will either lose our sanity from this discovery or escape from the illumination into the calm and security of a fresh era of darkness. Followers of certain mystical doctrines have speculated about the tremendous scale of the universal cycle in which our planet and humanity are merely temporary events. They have suggested at bizarre continuances in language that would congeal one's blood, if not hidden behind a mild hopefulness, yet the solitary view of forbidden ancient epics, which fills me with cold dread when I consider it, and drives me to frenzy when I dream of it, did not originate from them. That view, like all fearful glimpses of truth, burst forth from a chance combination of separate fragments here, an old news article and the writings of a deceased scholar. I wish for no other person to complete this combination. Surely, if I live, I will never consciously provide a connection in such a monstrous sequence. I believe the professor also meant to remain quiet about the portion he understood, and that he would have eliminated his notes had not a swift death taken him. My awareness of the matter started in the winter of 1926 and 27 with the passing of my great-uncle, George Gamble Angell, a retired professor of Semitic languages at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. Professor Angell was renowned as an expert on ancient writings and had often been consulted by the leaders of famous museums. So his demise at 92 years of age may be remembered by many. In the local area, curiosity was heightened by the unclear reason for his death. The professor had been attacked while coming back from the Newport ferry, collapsing suddenly according to onlookers after being bumped by a sailor-like Negro, who had emerged from one of the peculiar shadowy alleys on the steep hillside that served as a quick route from the docks to the dead man-ish residence on William Street. Doctors could not locate any visible ailment, but decided after confused discussion that some unknown damage to the heart caused by the vigorous climb up such a sharp slope by such an aged man was the reason for his end. Back then I saw no cause to disagree with this ruling, but lately I am prone to doubt and more than doubt. As the heir and executor of my great-uncle, for he died a childless widower, I was supposed to examine his documents quite thoroughly, and for that goal I transferred his complete collection of files and containers to my rooms in Boston. A large portion of the material I organized will later be issued by the American Archaeological Society. But there was one box I found very confusing, and which I felt strongly reluctant to show to others. It had been fastened shut, and I did not locate the key until I thought to inspect the personal ring the professor kept in his pocket. Then, truly, I managed to open it, but when I did, I appeared only to face a greater and more tightly shut obstacle. For what could be the sense of the strange clay carving and the scattered scribbles, musings, and clippings I discovered? Had my uncle, in his final years, grown trusting of the most shallow deceptions? I determined to find the odd artist liable for the seeming disruption of an old man's tranquility. The carving was a crude rectangle under an inch thick and roughly 5 by 6 inches across, clearly of recent making. Its patterns, however, were not at all recent in feeling and implication, for although the oddities of certain modern art styles are numerous and bizarre, they do not usually replicate the mysterious symmetry which hides in prehistoric script. And script of some kind, the majority of these designs certainly seem to be, though my memory, in spite of knowing my uncle's papers and collections well, could not in any way recognize this specific type, or even suggest its furthest connections. Above these seeming hieroglyphics was a figure of clear pictorial purpose, though its impressionistic style prevented a very distinct understanding of its character. It appeared to be a kind of monster, or a symbol depicting a monster, of a shape only a sick imagination could create. If I state that my rather fanciful mind produced simultaneous images of an octopus, a dragon, and a distorted human, I will not be untrue to the essence of the object. A soft, tentacled head topped a bizarre and scaly body with primitive wings. But it was the overall silhouette of the entire thing which rendered it most horrifying. Behind the figure was a faint impression of a gigantic architectural setting. The writing that accompanied this odd item was, apart from a pile of newspaper clippings and Professor Angell's latest handwriting, and it did not attempt a literary manner. What seemed to be the chief document was labeled with the words of an unheard of cult, printed carefully to prevent misreading. This manuscript was split into two parts, the first labeled with the year The Dream, and dream work of a man living in Providence, and the second the account of an inspector from New Orleans at a meeting of a learned society with notes on it and a professor's report. The other handwritten pages were short notes, some being records of the peculiar dreams of various individuals, some being quotes from mystical books and periodicals, and the remainder remarks on long-enduring secret groups and concealed cults with mentions of sections in such mythological and anthropological reference works. The clippings mostly referred to bizarre mental illness and incidents of collective madness or obsession in the spring of 1925. The initial portion of the main manuscript related a very peculiar story. It seems that on the 1st of March, 1925, a slender, dark young man of nervous and agitated appearance had visited Professor Angell carrying the unusual clay carving, which was at that time very moist and new. His card displayed the name of Henry Anthony Wilcox, and my uncle had identified him as the youngest son of a respectable family slightly known to him, who had recently been learning sculpture at the Rhode Island School of Design and residing alone at a building near that school. Wilcox was a gifted young man of recognized talent but considerable oddity, and had from an early age attracted notice through the strange tales and unusual dreams he was accustomed to telling. He referred to himself as psychically highly sensitive, but the steady people of the old trading city dismissed him as simply odd. Never socializing much with others, he had slowly faded from public view and was now known only to a minor circle of artists from other places. Even the local art club, eager to maintain its traditional views, had considered him entirely hopeless. During the visit, according to the professor's manuscript, the sculptor suddenly requested the advantage of his hostess' archaeological expertise in deciphering the hieroglyphics on the carving. He spoke in a vague, unnatural way that hinted at affectation and discouraged friendliness, and my uncle replied with some sharpness, for the obvious newness of the tablet suggested a connection to anything but archaeology. Young Wilcox's reply, which struck my uncle enough to make him remember and write it down word for word, was of an incredibly poetic nature which must have exemplified his entire manner of speaking, and which I have since found very typical of him. He stated, "It is new, truly, for I created it last night in a dream of alien cities, and dreams are more ancient than thoughtful Tyre, or the meditative Sphinx, or Babylon encircled by gardens." It was then that he started the wandering narrative which suddenly stirred a slumbering memory and captured the feverish attention of my uncle. There had been a minor earthquake shock the previous night, the strongest noticed in New England for several years, and Wilcox's imagination had been strongly influenced. Upon going to bed, he had experienced an extraordinary dream of massive cities built from gigantic stones and towering pillars, all wet with green slime and ominous with hidden terror. Hieroglyphics had covered the walls and columns, and from some unknown place beneath had arisen a voice that was not a voice, a confused feeling which only imagination could turn into sound, but which he tried to convey with a nearly unspeakable muddle of letters. This verbal muddle was the clue to the memory that agitated and troubled Professor Angell. He questioned the sculptor with scientific detail and examined with desperate concentration the carving upon which the young man had discovered himself laboring, cold and dressed only in his sleepwear, when wakefulness had confusingly taken him. My uncle blamed his advanced age. Wilcox later said, for his delay in identifying both the hieroglyphics and the pictorial design. Many of his inquiries seemed very inappropriate to his guest, particularly those which attempted to link the latter with bizarre cults or organizations. And Wilcox could not comprehend the repeated pledges of secrecy he was given in return for confessing membership in some broad mystical or pagan religious group. When Professor Angell became certain that the sculptor was truly unaware of any cult or system of hidden knowledge, he overwhelmed his visitor with requests for future accounts of dreams. This produced regular results, for after the first meeting the manuscript notes daily visits from the young man, during which he recounted startling pieces of nighttime imagery, whose core was always some dreadful gigantic sight of dark and dripping stone with an underground voice or mind yelling monotonously, in puzzling sense impacts impossible to write except as nonsense. The two noises often repeated. Are those written with certain letters? On March 23rd, the manuscript went on. Wilcox did not arrive, and checks at his residence showed he had been hit with a vague type of fever and brought to his family as home. On Waterman Street, he had shouted in the night, waking several other artists in the building, and had displayed since then only shifts between unconsciousness and madness. My uncle immediately called the family, and from that time maintained close observation of the situation, visiting frequently the office of Dr. Toby, whom he discovered was in charge. The youth's feverish mind, it seemed, was lingering on strange things, and the doctor trembled now and then as he spoke of them. They involved not only a repetition of his prior dreams, but also touched wildly on an enormous thing of immense height which moved or shuffled about. He never fully portrayed this object, but occasional desperate words, as repeated by Dr. Toby, persuaded the professor it must be the same as the unnamed horror he had tried to portray in his dream carving. Mention of this object, the doctor added, was always a sign the young man was about to sink into an activity. His temperature, strangely, was not much above average, but the entire state was otherwise such as to indicate genuine fever rather than mental illness. On April 2nd at about 3 in the afternoon, every sign of Wilcox's sickness suddenly stopped. He sat up in bed, surprised to find himself at home and totally unaware of what had occurred in dream or actuality since the night of March 22nd. Declared healthy by his doctor, he went back to his rooms after 3 days. But to Professor Angell, he was of no more help. All signs of strange dreaming had disappeared with his improvement, and my uncle kept no log of his nightly thoughts after a week of meaningless and unrelated reports of completely ordinary visions. Here the first section of the manuscript concluded, but mentions of some of the scattered notes provided me with much to ponder, so much indeed that only the deep-seated doubt in shaping my outlook can explain my lasting suspicion of the artist. The notes in question were those describing the dreams of different people during the same period. When young Wilcox had his strange experiences, my uncle, it appears, had swiftly begun an immensely widespread series of inquiries among almost all the acquaintances he could ask without rudeness, requesting nightly reports of their dreams and the dates of any remarkable visions for some time previous. The response to his appeal seems to have differed, but he must, at the minimum, have gotten more replies than any normal man could have managed without an assistant. This first batch of letters was not kept, but his notes created a complete and truly important summary. Ordinary people in social and commercial life gave an almost entirely negative outcome, though isolated instances of uneasy but shapeless nighttime feelings appear here and there. Always between March 23rd and April 2nd, the time of young Wilcox's fevered state, men of science were little more influenced, though for cases of vague description hint at brief sights of strange scenery. And in one instance there is noted a fear of something unnatural. It was from the artists and poets that the relevant answers arrived, and I understand that alarm would have erupted had they been able to share their accounts. As it was, without their original letters, I partly suspected the person compiling them of having posed suggestive questions or of having altered the letters to support what he had secretly decided to perceive. That is why I kept feeling that Wilcox, somehow aware of the old information my uncle had held, had been deceiving the elderly scholar. These answers from artistic types told a troubling story. From February 28th to April 2nd, a significant number of them had dreamed very strange things, the strength of the dreams being vastly greater during the time of the sculptor's delirium. More than a quarter of those who reported anything reported scenes and partial sounds not unlike those Wilcox had described, and some of the dreamers admitted intense fear of the gigantic and named thing glimpsed near the end. One instance, which the note details with stress, was very tragic. The individual, a well-known architect with interest in mystical and hidden doctrines, became violently deranged on the date of young Wilcox's collapse, and died several months later after constant screams to be rescued from some escaped inhabitant of the infernal regions. Had my uncle identified these cases by name instead of only by number, I would have tried some verification and personal inquiry. But as it stood, I managed to track down just a few. All of these, however, confirmed the notes completely. I have frequently pondered if all the people the professor questioned felt as bewildered as this small group. It is fortunate that no clarification will ever get to them. The press clippings, as I have hinted, dealt with instances of panic, insanity, and peculiarity during the specified period. Professor Angell must have used a clipping service, for the quantity of excerpts was enormous and the sources spread across the world. Here was a nighttime suicide in London, where a solitary sleeper had jumped from a window after a terrible scream. Here also a wandering letter to a newspaper editor in South America, where a fanatic predicts a terrible future from visions he has witnessed. A report from California describes a mystical community as putting on white robes to gather for some glorious climax which never comes. While pieces from India talk cautiously of serious local agitation near the end of March. The west of Ireland also is filled with wild gossip and folklore, and an imaginative painter hangs an irreverent dream landscape in a Paris exhibition of 1926. And so many are the noted disturbances in mental hospitals that only a wonder could have prevented the medical profession from observing strange similarities and drawing perplexed inferences. An odd collection of clippings, all considered, and I can now hardly imagine the hardened rationality with which I dismissed them. But I was then persuaded that young Wilcox had been aware of the older matters referenced by the professor. Thanks for watching. Everyone, if you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more content.